Hey, welcome to the Style Sessions. It's been a while since I've done one of these things, and we're redoing one that we did quite a long time ago. I just wasn't really happy with the technical aspects or the audio or the visual with it, so took some time, let the summer go by, and now we're back up doing a Style Session just this one time. And add to our collection of videos, and we'll probably do a few more next year as well. I'm Roger Mittag. I'm the host of the Style Sessions. I'm also the founder of Prud'homme Beer Certification, which is Canada's beer certification program and one of the major beer sommelier programs around the world. In my eyes, I created it. It's the best. Like hands down, it covers so many different topics. It's just a wonderful thing. And we have it online and in classroom format as well. So anyway, we're going to talk about stouts today because we're now into colder weather, and in my eyes, stouts could be consumed all year round, and I don't understand why some retailers have to look at it as though these are only warm weather kind of drinks. I find stouts very satisfying throughout. They're marvelous to pair up with different kinds of foods, and they don't just have to be for cold weather. So what we're going to do, as we always do with Style Sessions, is we're going to pour a beer first, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it as well. I've got 3 different beers that we're going to take a look at. So first beer that I'm going to pour is Guinness. This is Guinness Pub Draft. I got really hooked on Guinness quite a long time ago. I've had the pleasure of going to Dublin, Ireland, and going through the Guinness storehouse and having a pint on the top of the museum or tour. It was a phenomenal experience, and it's 360-degree glass, and they've done just an amazing job of giving you the right information. You get certified as a Guinness pourer, but I've done lots of training. I've also got another video on my YouTube channel that shows you how to pour a Guinness properly, both on draft and in can, but we're going to do it again. So with this particular beer, this is a dry Irish stout, and Guinness has sort of evolved to be really its own within the category itself, but there's always something interesting about pouring it. So this is a beer that has nitrogen added to it, or it's nitrogenated, and inside there's a little thing called a widget, and it releases the nitrogen when you actually open the beer up, because there's a hiss, and you'll hear it when I open it up. And then it's a very, very specific pour. There are some people who believe you take the glass and you pour it right straight in, you let it touch like this. But I'm not a fan of that, because I don't know whose hands have been on the outside of this can, so I don't really want the can touching the inside of the glass or the beer itself. So we're just going to open it and then start on a 45 nice and gently. You can see that as I'm pouring, it just looks like a gigantic milkshake, which is really the design behind it, because what's happening as I'm pouring is the nitrogen is settling out, and it's actually, you can see the cascading right there in front of you. It's just a beautiful thing to see. It's something that I could probably replace as a fireplace channel, because it's just, to me, it's just stunning watching this whole thing. You've seen that the head forms really nicely. It's right at the top of the toucan logo that's on there, and on the other side, it's just barely at the top of the Guinness harp, which is really where you want it to be. So I'm just going to let that sit and settle, and I can tell you a little bit about Arthur Guinness and the story of Guinness. So before we really get into the whole stout thing, I'll just talk a little bit about Guinness. But Arthur Guinness bought a derelict brewery in 1759. It was St. James Gate in London, and this brewery had been decommissioned for a long period of time. It was pretty much a nightmare when he bought it. But Arthur Guinness was a really, really smart businessman, and negotiated a 9,000-year lease for £45 a year for this brewery. Now imagine that you had the foresight to believe that your brand would exist in 9,000 years, and Guinness certainly believed that. And that £45 a year apparently is still in place. So it's a rather insignificant amount of money that you pay for this wonderful brewery. But so here we are, finished Guinness. It's really cool because when you look at stouts, quite often people get afraid of them because they're afraid of the dark, and they look at it and they go, "Oh, that's black and heavy, and it's just going to be too much for me to drink." But the reality is it's not black at all. In fact, if you hold it up to the light, what you'll notice is that there are some really nice ruby red characteristics to it. So it is a dark brown, almost a Coca-Cola kind of look to it. But it's beautiful ruby red. It's got this really nice creamy, almost cappuccino crema colored foam on the top, and it's really dense, and it's never going to go down because there's hardly any CO2 in this beer. It's got quite a lot less carbon dioxide than other beers, and so it's going to be stable because of the way it's built. Great smells in Guinness. I think typically what we look for in this kind of a beer, and especially in Guinness, is there definitely is some smokiness. There's coffee, chocolate, cocoa, molasses, vanilla. There's some really interesting bit of earthiness in there as well. But to me, this is just a wonderful beer to have. It's considered to be a light beer, and it's 4% alcohol by volume, so it has the same amount of calories as something like Coors Light does. For me, I love this beer at warmer temperature. I mean, there's been a push on to serve Guinness extra cold in the UK, and I think a lot of that has to do with new consumers don't want to drink beers the way that their parents did or their grandfathers did. And there is a discussion, people in Britain, they don't drink beer warm, but they drink it at cellar temperature. So for me, the proper temperature for Guinness is somewhere upwards of 7 degrees Celsius. That's when you start getting all of the characteristics and all of the flavors coming out. And, it's an amazing beer. There's so many different myths about Guinness as well that people, I keep hearing them all the time. So we're going to deal with a couple of those right now as well. So first thing is that some of the ad campaigns historically with Guinness promoted that Guinness gave you strength. So there's guys holding girders up, and the interesting thing is that people now believe Guinness has iron in it, and they believe that it gets prescribed by doctors because it's an iron supplement for elderly patients, and it helps to, bring back their iron content a little bit more. That couldn't be further from the truth. No brewery wants any kind of iron base in their beers, and you want to be well below 1 part per billion of iron in there. Iron tastes like blood or pennies, and it's not a good characteristic to have in a beer. So there's more iron in a hard-boiled egg than there is in a glass of Guinness. So that's myth number one dispelled. Second myth was that you would give this to pregnant women or women who had just given birth because it promoted lactation or breast milk. And the interesting thing is not just Guinness does that. That's pretty much any beer with low alcohol content and hops, and it's really the hops that do it, nothing else. Hops are viewed as a galactagogue, which is it's an herbal remedy to help bring in milk once a child is born. But the thing is, you need low alcohol with that too. The higher the alcohol, the worse it becomes. So you're actually just drinking the beer and you're not getting any of the benefits of it as well. There was, up until recently, another discussion about Guinness, and that it was not vegan friendly. And that was bang on, because historically brewers always used something called isinglass or finings as a filter medium. And you go back into time, and what they would have taken is the bladders of fish, the swim bladders of fish, and then dried them out and then pulverized them and put those into the beer. And then what that would do is that would pull all the particulate out of the beer, and then you'd get this really nice clear beer. So Guinness, for years and years and years, continued to do that. And then, a lot of people within the vegan community complained that this, wasn't right and that they weren't vegan friendly. And a few years ago, Guinness stopped using isinglass in their beers. Did talk about it a little bit, but it's not a huge issue to them. And I caught up with the director of beer at Guinness in Canada, and we were having a discussion and had lunch and a beer. And I brought it up and I said, hey, listen, why did you cave under pressure and get rid of the isinglass because of the vegan community? And his answer to me was, no, absolutely not. What we did was we just reduced costs. We didn't feel that it was a necessary thing to do anymore. And so really what they did was they took it out and they just filter the way everybody else filters. So a few myths in and around Guinness. There is some interesting things about Guinness as well. Like you can see a lot of different kinds of glassware, and they have numbers on the side of their glasses. I'm going to try to grab one for you. I know I have one here, so I'm just going to grab it and then just show that to you. So on the side of a Guinness glass are numbers, and there's all kinds of different things on there. It helps with the pour line, shows you how to pour it. It tells you how many units this is. But the numbers are very specific because what they do is they tell Guinness when that glass was created and how long it's been in the hospitality environment, so that Guinness can remove the glasses on an ongoing basis. It's kind of an interesting little tidbit of information. So while I'm enjoying my Guinness, or hopefully while you're enjoying your Guinness, we'll talk a little bit about the history of stouts. And so we have to go back into the late 1600s, early 1700s, when there was a style that had been created called porters. Now, porters weren't originally, I do a whole session on porters, so you might as well check that one out as well, but I'll just recap it. So porters originally weren't something that was made in the brewery, it was something that was blended in the pub. So porters would come in, these are the people that are doing all the heavy lifting in town. They would come in at the end of the day looking for a nutritional pint and with a little bit more oomph to it. And they would get something called 3 threads. And 3 threads was a third ale, a third beer, which had hops in it, ale did not, and a third older beer, which was higher in alcohol. So it had a little bit nutrition, a little bit of oomph to it. So eventually the 3 threads would be renamed as a porter, and then porters were then created in the brewery. They were actually the very first industrial beer to be put into a brewery and allowed to age within the brewery, because prior to that, beers were aged in the pub. And so you had all these people drinking porters. Now, porters were great for shipping as well because they had a little bit more hop content in them. They had higher alcohol, so they actually traversed across the Baltic in some cases and down to India in other cases. So they were actually pretty good for shipping. And then people started to want more, and they wanted more alcohol, they wanted more body, more flavor, and so these beers were then referred to as stout porters or robust porters. And eventually the word porter was just dropped so that you had this whole new style called stout. And stouts are typically, to compare them to porters, the way I would look at it is porters are typically more chocolatey. They have a little bit more fruit note to them. They're a little lighter in the body. They may tend to be a bit sweeter, whereas stouts are typically more burnt. They're more coffee. They're more dark chocolate. They have a little bit more body to them, probably a little bit more lasting bitterness. Not in the case of Guinness, but a little bit more lasting bitterness. And then they are much, much darker as well, typically speaking. Now, brewers, they put their own spin on it. So, excuse me. So an interesting thing happened. Stouts became very popular, and then, as we know, Guinness started brewing in 1759. But in 1817, Daniel Wheeler was an inventor and came up with the roasting drum to roast malt. And what that allowed brewers to do is, because they were being taxed quite heavily for the war efforts, there was a malt tax on. Brewers are entrepreneurs and want to make as much money as they possibly can. With Wheeler's invention, what it allowed him to do is create a roasting drum to roast malt or barley and create these really heavily intense characteristics that we're seeing in modern porters and stouts. And it basically revolutionized the way that brewers were adopting how they were proceeding with it. It also made their beer less expensive because they weren't using as much refined malt, which therefore didn't have as much sugar content in it, and that's what you were being taxed on. So interesting turnaround. There are a multiple of different kinds of stouts in the marketplace. I think a lot of the things that we're seeing these days are pretty much dry stouts. We see oatmeal stouts from time to time. I'm going to feature one in a second. There's been a lot of discussion about oyster stouts. You don't see them very often. They used to put oysters into the brew itself, or even just oyster shells, give it a bit more of that briny characteristic to it. But we've seen lots of milk stouts in the marketplace, and a lot of craft brewers are really into milk stouts. Now, what's a milk stout? A milk stout is simply the addition of lactose. Lactose is the sugar that is in milk, but it tends to lend a sweetness to the beer itself. So it removes, I think it creates a little bit more balance, but it is a little bit more on the sweet side and not on the drier side. So if you're looking for something that you would classify as a sweet stout, then you want a milk stout for the most part. The other thing you should be aware of is obviously lactose for some people is an allergen, and brewers must put those kinds of things on their labels. And then there are foreign stouts, foreign extra stouts as well, and imperial stouts. Imperial stouts typically very, very high alcohol content, 8, 9, 10% ABV. And then foreign export stouts are also high in alcohol content. They tend to be a bit sweeter, and I've got one of those that we'll try as well. So next beer that I want to pour for you is one of my favorites from a Canadian perspective. This is McCausland's Saint-Ambroise Oatmeal Stout. This is a really, really nice, well-made, good quality stout, but it has different characteristics than Guinness does, and I'll show you some of them in a second. So I'm pouring this into a shaker glass. Now, I'm not a fan of shaker glasses, but for this particular beer, this is a great glass because it really allows the beer to open up. Because there are so many wonderful flavors in stouts, we want a big, wide open mouth in there. Also, good solid glass. I can get my hand around it. It's going to warm it up a touch more. So this particular beer, if you can see, I'm going to hold it up there. You can see that the foam is quite a bit different in color and in density. So there's no nitrogen in this beer, but it's still really beautifully creamy. But it's now darker. It's now a mocha color, which is the way I look at it. And the other thing about this beer is that it is black. It's black as a midnight starless sky. You cannot see through this thing. It's very, very opaque. There's very little color coming through on the other side. And it's got great aromas. A little bit more on the burnt side on this particular one. Espresso, really dark, 70-80% cocoa chocolate. But there is also a lightness to it that is coming from the oatmeal. The oatmeal is giving it a bit more of that cereal kind of characteristic. Again, lots of smoke. It's typically something that we get in these. And this is a carbonated beer, so it's got a little bit more oomph to it. It's got a little bit more astringency and acidity. It's got a little bit more pronounced bitterness as well, so it's upfront and in your face. I think if you were starting out, you might want to start out with Guinness and then gradually move up to this. This to me is probably one of the more intense stouts. I just love it because it's got so many great characteristics to it. It's got a relatively longer finish and a longer aftertaste than the Guinness. Guinness, it finishes pretty quick. It's got a more moderate aftertaste. This particular one stays in your mouth for quite a bit of time. So a little bit on McCausland. So McCausland, the McCausland brewery is now owned by Brasseur RJ in Montreal. And Peter McCausland in 1989 decided that he wanted to get into the brewing industry. So he and his wife Ellen fired up the McCausland brewery, and it is a stunningly beautiful brewery on the west side of Montreal. Great place, great tap room. They make phenomenal beers. I've been there a few times now, and I'm always amazed when they give us tours as to how good that they really are. One of the big things that brewers really try to eliminate is the amount of dissolved oxygen in your beer, because that's the one big enemy that can make your beer go off a lot faster and reduce shelf life. But the brewers at McCausland do an amazing job, and they have amongst the lowest dissolved oxygen rates in all of Canada. So they get really good shelf life out of their beers. It's a bit more intense. So that brings me to a foreign extra stout. So this is Sinha Stout. This is from Sri Lanka, and it's at 8.8% ABV. And this is an amazing stout. I've had this numerous times. I haven't had it in quite a long time, but I wanted to go over it again. So again, you're getting that same kind of mocha head on there. It's a little darker. It's got a beautiful color to it. Again, black as a starless night. It's just wonderful, opaque. Normally speaking, I poured it into a chalice because I really want to be able to warm this up and get everything out of it. So this is one where you want to wrap your hands around that and smell. It's got a little bit of a waste at the top before you get to the mouth, and what that does is it keeps the head in nice and intact and allows me to smell. Now, this is a beer that I'm going to need to open up a little bit. I just want this thing to breathe. I need to take a few sips of it before I allow it to get to where I need it to be. But typically with foreign extra stouts or foreign export stouts, there's a little bit more of burnt sugars and molasses and fruitcake and rum notes in there. They're really smooth and easy to drink. There's a bit more sweetness on a foreign export stout. Higher alcohol, a little bit more sweetness comes out. Yeah, lots of the, again, more espresso notes in the palate. A little bit more on the dark chocolate, but the whole dark fruit characteristic is in here as well, and burnt sugars. Amazing beer for export because a high alcohol, it would last a long time. Really good beer on a nice cold winter's night. If you can imagine sitting around a nice fire, even outside, if you were outside, it would be a great thing to have out there. But that's you can find these all over the place. I've picked 3. There's some wonderful stouts being made in our craft beer community. So I would strongly encourage you, if you haven't ever had a stout before, to give it a try. They're wonderful. They've got lots of body, lots of flavor. They're great with food. They're amazing with chocolate, and could replace a coffee for dessert. So with that, I'm always around. If you ever have any questions, if you've seen this video and you have any questions, you're welcome to email me, rmittag@thirstforknowledge.ca. Lots of YouTube content, so subscribe to our channel. We've got great classes both online and in class, so go to tfkbeer.com and you'll have a great experience learning a little bit more about beer. Anyway, that's it for me tonight. Thank you for coming to the Style Sessions, and cheers.